Oh, yeah.
Oh, we went at the Taco Bell. But they have a Taco Bell on Broadway with live music.
That
No
wasn't
way.
Just, I mean, that
What?
wasn't there when I
Yeah, it's
grew up.
Taco Bell, but they got live music.
What?
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I would do it just to do it. Like,
They have
just
like an
go
upper
to the...
balcony area too.
Oh, my gosh.
That's
That would
amazing.
probably be my new favorite place.
You can have Baja Blast with
Probably, yeah.
alcohol.
That's right, man. Oh, my gosh. It's
Kind of blast.
so cool. That kind of blast.
Yep.
Oh, that's so fun.
Okay,
That's
so I don't know how long I'll last tonight.
cool.
Big day yesterday.
Yeah.
That was a great picture you took. That would have to come up on the screen. Boy, that was awesome. Did you enjoy your jobs?
It was interesting. It was like stressful slash I enjoyed it. It was a mix of so many things.
Yeah.
Tech world is crazy, man.
Did you get out front and listen?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No, I did. I sat out there and listened to both bands.
Oh, okay.
Brian stayed on stage the whole time.
Oh, you should have spelled them once in a while so you could hear something. I was thinking about that today. Did you have fun, Brian?
Oh, yeah.
Good, because I'm going to ask you to do it all the time.
You're in.
Gosh, wow, it was really something. Anyway, there's about 600 people there for those of you who weren't there.
Mm.
The bands were just incredible, and there were some amazing moments. My neighbor's got cancer. He's this phenomenal guitar player. He's really good friends with the headliner, and they asked him to come up and do a guitar solo thing back and forth. His first public appearance since he started treatment, so it was kind of a touching moment. And he killed it. And he got off. It's like, oh, I'm so rusty. Yeah, I mean, you heard what he did.
Oh my gosh, it's insane.
Yeah, it's okay. Anyway, so tonight's going to be guitars. I see. Anything you? Did I ask you to do that?
I mean, you did.
Oh, okay. That's great.
Not that we have to use them, but they're there.
I have some audio files too, so
Whatever you want.
yeah, so we probably don't have to.
Just following your instructions.
But things to remember about last week. Last week was a really big subject, so it was kind of hard for me to get into a thorough review without just doing the whole module again. So this is a general overview of what you should take away, which is essentially everything. But you should know which mic to use for which drum. So like last night, the headliner dude was giving me a hard time because I really like this one particular mic for kick drums, and it's a tom mic. And I like this really like this mic for toms. That's a kick drum mic. And he was like, "What are you doing, dude?" You know. But to know the sonic characteristics that you like for any given mic. Now, we typically aren't going to be switching them around, but who knows what the future holds. That's why I'm kind of trying to equip you guys for just whatever you come across. And the same thing with EQ. So last night, most of the problems that I had were configuration issues and routing issues. Do you remember the module about signal flow? Last night, I was trying to get the kick drum going, and I had signal. The VU meters were jumping up and down on the signal on the channel. So that's all good, but nothing's coming out the speakers, and nothing's bouncing up over here. And I could not. Everything was unmuted, except I had set up these. I think I told you. Did I tell you guys about DCAs? Yeah. Okay. So they are a way of grouping things together so that you can turn them all up and down at once. Remember? Okay. So I had the drums all on a DCA, which is on a totally different screen, and the DCA was muted. So all the drums were muted, no matter what I did. And I'm thinking, I don't know how to do this anymore. Because in that scenario, it's been 20 months we figured out last night. So, but I'm really glad we got to use that mixer. First of all, it sounded fantastic. fantastic.
Yeah, it did.
Oh
That's great.
gosh, it's like this is what I was built for, not this church stuff.
Right. Absolutely.
But
It's great.
yeah, and plus it's what I've been driving for the last several months, so that was much easier to deal with. But EQ points and curves, so do you have any? Yeah, I had problems with if you get good enough, you can actually hear feedback and go, that sounds like. Were you there for sound check, Becca?
No, I just have a story related to that.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Yeah. You. So like, I can't. Oh, is this guitar? I try to get as much gain before feedback that I can get. And his guitar was direct inject. We'll be talking about that. He had a much superior pickup in his guitar. It sounded very good. But they started to do this sort of low mid-range feedback thing. And I said, let me find that. And he said, oh, 275 hertz. It was 276 hertz. He was astonished too that he got it. But I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you'll get there, and it's useful to do it. I mean, but there are actual exercises you can go off and find and do to get there if you want to. If you're that sick in your mind. Okay. And the whole attack of the kick, thump of the kick. I mean, last night was this completely full band. 2 guitars, keys, 2 keys, playing simultaneously sometimes. Bass drums, 4 vocalists. And I was, really focused on mixing. I thought it sounded really, really good. But then people did recordings on their phones, iPhones and stuff, and I listened to one of them, and I could hear every instrument. So that made me very happy. So each instrument in its place and a place for each instrument. And I sent that little video clip off to Dan Rodriguez, and I said, this is what it looked like and sounded like from the front. He went, wow, like that. So happy guy.
That's awesome.
And you made the 20-inch kick sound like it was a nice, huge fat.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. They were like they didn't like so much sound. They complained at first. And I went, too bad. And he used to play Beaverbot snare and toms. I did not actually do that last night. I didn't have time to reconfigure the mixer. I didn't really want to do that. But they were kind of an Americana vibe, which it isn't reverb heavy anyway. So okay, that's what you should remember. Guitars. Anybody name this tour? I'm probably the only guy that was alive when this tour happened. That's Neil Young. That's he did this tour with just Crazy Horse, which was his band. It was 2 guitars, bass, and drums, really basic. And he had these giant amps built for the tour, just for kicks. Okay, acoustic guitar is the most challenging one. That's a real instrument on the right. Can you imagine tuning that thing?
No. So awful.
I think most of the strings are for resonating or something. So ideally, what you want to be able to do with an acoustic guitar in a live performance situation is to use a DI or the built-in pickup in a guitar. Some of them do not sound any good, and you have to really fight that. Nathan has a guitar that sounds good and a guitar that sounds bad. And he was like, I want to play the guitar that sounds bad. And I said, no, you can't. You have to play the guitar that sounds good.
It hurts.
And it makes the difference. Well, when we had the guest preacher, what's his name? What's his name, Josh?
Josh.
He was like, how do you get that acoustic sound? It's
He
so good.
he came up to me and was
Yeah.
talking about how good you have it sounding out there.
Good. So it's really worth it to remember what I said about making things sound good. Start at the source, as close to the source as you can. In this case, the source itself. If you can, I think when we first started, I said, "Do you have a different guitar?" Didn't I ask you that right out?
I think you gave me a funny look, and I said, I have my other guitar
Okay.
here too.
But start at the source, right? Now I can't say, do you have a different voice to sing with or anything like
Right,
that, but
right.
I can ask you about instruments. I can ask you to tune your drums in a different way or tweak the guitar amp a little bit, if you're willing to, things like that. And then mic choice, et cetera, et cetera. Always use a high pass filter at about 100 hertz. I think about last night. That's pretty much what I did, because he did some stuff that way low down on the neck acoustically, as I recall. And you may need to cut at about 250, because that's when it starts to sound boomy and woolly. That's almost always the problem, is that 250 hertz. Now last night, I did that out of habit, and then when I started playing, I brought it back up because it sounded really thin, even with everything else going on. They're really good, really top-notch players last night, and they really knew how to stay out of each other's way, even with their tone choices. So I was able to do that. Most bands are not that good. And boost highs at about 4 kilohertz. Once again, I did that out of habit last night, and I pulled it back. I think it was a difference between the speakers we have in the room at the gym and the speakers that I have in front of house are much truer. They're much more transparent. I mean, you just turn them up and they sound glorious without hardly doing anything. So, whereas in the gym I had to really juice the high end. If you look at the curves that exist, well, they're fiddling with the mixer now, so I don't know what they're doing, but they came and picked it up today. But I had the high end pushed really hard on it, and I was struggling with the high end for the first half of the first band's set. I was like, this is going to get annoying if I don't do something about it. So finally I just pulled down on the whole house, and all of a sudden everything was like, oh, this is nice. So, and some mild compression, and I have a demonstration of what a funky DI sounds like, which it happens to be these two guitars I got. Well, no, I'm not sure. It's from one of the online mixes we did, and you gave me a DI plus the mic.
Probably Mike did, maybe.
Yeah, you did.
Depends on
You did.
what the week was.
So this is a really perfect scenario. Now that it may be subtle to your ears, okay? And I didn't have time because I forgot all my computers at home and had to run back. Who knows why I did that? Maybe it was the 18-hour day I did yesterday. So this one is the DI. Let's get the volume control in front of me here. Okay. Change his mind where his output wants to be here. Oops. Speakers. Let's try this. It's got sort of this plasticky thing going on. If you sit in a room with an acoustic guitar, it doesn't sound like that. Right? Are you tracking with me? Listen to it again. contrast it to the other one. Hear that? See how much more real that sounds? And that's actually the difference between, in this case, it's the guitar that Nathan likes to play, mic'd up, which sounds fine, because it sounds fine sitting in the room with it. But it's also the direct out of that guitar, which doesn't sound fine. But if he uses his other guitar sounds almost exactly like when you mic up a guitar, right from the get-go. So there's almost nothing you can do with processing to make that weird plasticky sound go away. Here it is again. Stark contrast, right? Listen to them next to each other. You guys need to learn to train your ears about what actually sounds good. And that this is an exercise in that. If you were to hear that thing without comparing it to the other thing, you might go, oh, that sounds fine. But you need to know after a while of doing this, you need to be able to know that right away. I mean, as soon as I heard Nathan's guitar for the first time, I was like, I'm not going to be able to get this to sound good. I just know I'm not. Just because I know what a good acoustic guitar is supposed to sound like.
Right. It's mostly an issue with the pickup in the guitar. Right?
It is. It's the pickup, and what I'm hearing, what I'm hearing is the artifacts that come from either a poorly placed or poorly designed piezoelectric pickup. Now, I didn't talk about that at all when I was talking about microphones. Piezoelectricity is the physical property that some materials have, that if you flex them or put them under pressure, they produce electricity. It's just a property of the material. So they thought, well, this is cool. We'll stick it in guitars and stuff and see what happens. And what happens is that it acts like a microphone. So you can get these things called contact microphones that you can actually tack onto an acoustic guitar, and they've got a little wire hanging off them and amplify them, but they tend to sound like that first one. They also, in the beginning of drum machine history, they would use real drums as triggers, and then it would use these piezoelectric pads. You'd glue them to the drum head and hook them up to the brain, and then play them, and they weren't great. Okay, I mean, they weren't real sensitive, you know. Plus the machines work. I mean, this was primitive stuff compared to what we've got now.
So just personal question then, Matt, my acoustic that you don't like is a passive pickup, but the guitar you do like is an active pickup. Would that make a difference in?
Well, it's making a difference here. These days, they can stick so much signal processing in such a tiny space that the physical pickup might even be the same thing, but they've got some active DSP going on probably in there. And maybe it's even analog to make it sound really real. Alternatively, it might be an actual mic, like similar to what Jason uses to preach with. A really tiny mic. So I worked with a guy who's a phenomenal acoustic player, and he had both kinds of pickups going on simultaneously. Ran them both through dual 31 band graphic equalizers and into special preamps first, and then the graphic equalizer second. And he had them rigged so that when he hit his thumb against the guitar, it was like a kick drum. His finger like a snare, and he'd be doing drum kits while he was playing, and it sounded fantastic. I just turned it out. It just sounded fantastic all the time. But he was, you know, like, just a geek about it, and that's unusual. So yeah, apparently the difference between the two guitars is passive and active, but there might be another further difference upstream.
I think there, well, yeah, I think there is. I think one's an under saddle pickup and one is glued onto the bottom of the bridge as well. So they're picking up different,
Yeah,
slightly different areas in a different way.
the one that's under the bridge, is that the one that sounds bad?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Because the bridge, everybody know what the bridge is on the guitar? Right? But
I was
the
going to ask
signal.
what a pickup is.
Okay. Remember, I told you, be rude and interrupt. A pickup is basically, it's kind of it's a specialized transducer. A microphone is a transducer. A transducer is anything that changes one form of energy into another form of energy. So we're in our world, we're talking about changing audio energy into electrical energy. A pickup is a transducer that's specially made to pick up string vibrations. So on electric guitars, you look at your bandmate's guitar, and next time you'll see these little round dots underneath each string. Those are actually magnets, and they've got wire coiled around them. And when the string vibrates, it produces electricity in that coil, and it sends it out the wire. That's a pickup. And then there's different kinds of pickups. Oh, thank you for bringing this up, because I didn't think about addressing that with the electric guitar part. This is very important. Single coil and dual coil pickups. And then there's various brand names, and there's hotter ones and weaker ones and things like that. Single coil pickups are typically Fenders, okay, like Stratocasters and Telecasters. The actual brand names are single coil pickups, and they're typically the really twangy, bright guitars. They are really popular among, well, the band last night. That's all they use, single coil stuff. They're popular among Americana bands. They're good for a lot of different kinds of pop music. Double coil pickups, also called humbuckers, because the problem with single coil pickups is they hum. And when I get people in my studio and we turn the guitars up quite a bit, I have to have them orient the guitar a certain way. Okay, don't move except to play. And it's awkward, but because they act like big antennas, and my room just isn't wired well enough to not generate those fields that they pick up. Humbuckers are wired in such a way that they use this. I think they use the phase trick that balanced lines use. Remember, where one of the signals is inverted, but I'm not sure about that. It might just be a signal level, signal to noise ratio. I'm not sure. So, whatever, look it up yourself. But they're Gibsons, Les Pauls are the most famous ones that are dual coil. Les Paul invented humbucker pickups, and they are metal bands use them. They're just that big, gigantic, wall of sound from one dude on the stage kind of a guitar. And you can't. There was one time I was trying to make a record, and the guy had a Fender Telecaster, and we were trying to get that wall of sound, and we just couldn't. We layered, 7 of them, changing his position on the neck and all the tones, and we just couldn't get it to sound as big as one of those guitars. So it's nice to have both of them available in a recording situation. Typically, in the kind of, it seems to me, at least in the world that I deal with, single coil pickups are more popular. But I don't know. I haven't seen any sales figures. Okay. That was a really good question. What is a pickup? And you exposed a flaw in my teaching. Good for you.
So there's even now, like I have my new guitar actually does coil tapping. So it's a humbucker. You pop the switch and it
Oh, it becomes
taps
single.
it to single coil.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You can kind of choose different tonalities with one instrument
Sure.
too.
And people will have custom builds made with like 4 pickups, so that they can, because the single coil ones, they come stock typically. Well, Stratocaster comes stock typically with 3 pickups. So where the pickup is, this relates to the mic position issue. Where the pickup is in relationship to the bridge changes the tone that you get. So typically the pickup near the bridge is a lot brighter and twangier than the pickup that's more towards the middle or towards the neck. And you can get various combinations. There's a rotary switch on Strats, right? Help me get that right.
Strat is a 5-way switch.
5-way switch, right? That combines various ones, and you can have switches added to throw the pickups out of phase on purpose to make it sound kind of funky and twangy, extra twangy. So typically a guitar player will have a lot of options with tones. So if you ever get confident enough to the point where you feel like you can talk to the guitar player and tell them what to do, they typically have a lot of options available to them to be able to adjust. And once again, the approach is, hey, I want you to sound the best you can sound, and I can't get you to sound good. When you're talking.
Can you point to where it's at on Keiko's guitar?
The pickup?
Yeah.
It's not visible. You didn't have an electric here, did
No, I don't. So on an electric guitar, it's where the sound hole is
Well,
on the
here.
acoustic.
Whoops. Okay, there's my
Oh, there we go.
guitar. Back to the Future.
Oh, light up.
Boring.
That's I had one of those in my car. It's not an oscillation overthruster. What is
Flux capacitor.
flux capacitor? Thank you. Oscillation overthruster is from The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, which is classic. You gotta see it. Anyway, so here's the pickups on this guy. It's got a pair of pickups. These 2 bars are actually a single pickup, right? Well, they function as a single pickup typically when they're figured like this.
Yeah.
And then each pickup will have a volume control, and then there's typically a tone control down there, and they're typically not labeled. Usually is it true that the volume control is usually close to the strings so you can do the swell stuff, or does it depend on the guitar?
Usually it is. It depends on the guitar. Some scratches are pretty weird.
Okay, so anyway, we can go back here.
You just start turning
switches
massive
and flippy
Yeah,
keys.
that's what I do.
You start flipping stuff.
Matt, you've mostly been talking about passive pickup, right? Or
Yes. Well, in acoustic guitars, that's also a very good point. Acoustic guitars have passive and active, and Nathan pointed out that the one that's his one that sounds good is an active guitar, and typically active acoustic. I think Bethany, you've got an active one too, because you can give me volume and some tone stuff, right? Right.
Usually
So
right?
Different things.
Battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes a guitar will sound, the signal will sound weak and fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
You go and ask the guitar player, do you have an active pickup in there? Yes. Could you replace the battery?
Mm-hmm.
So that's always the issue there.
The dreaded.
Once again, go to the source. See if the problem is there first. Well, that's troubleshooting. That's a whole other module. Okay. But, so
they'll have those on electrics too, right? I mean, my bass has an active
Yeah.
pickup.
Yep. They can do a lot with the contour of the tone of the guitar.
Yes.
Expressive. Yes. And guitars are, there used to be a lot more custom guitar kind of work that going on. These days, I don't see a lot of custom guitars anymore, but there's just a lot of options available to guitar players right on the guitar as far as pickups and tonal control and stuff like that. So, I think as a sound person, you need to understand the difference between single coil and dual coil, what it sounds like. I'm sorry I didn't think of that. Active versus passive, and that plasticky versus good. Those are important things. Any other questions on this page? Okay. Now, we're not typically going to have to do this, but we're going to be growing as a church. And we got that other room, which I was just whining to the guys about, because it sounds like it's one of the worst rooms I've ever walked into acoustically. And I'm like, oops, we didn't think about this. Because we want to do some stuff in there. Anyway, different subject. But we might end up tuning that room nicely and using it for a folk cafe someday or something. And we might want to do acoustic sets that are truly acoustic. So I'm going to cover how to mic a guitar, which we don't do in the main room. I typically, in a live situation, use a 57 or an 81. There's lots of other choices, but in the studio, I use an SM81 in conjunction with a large diaphragm condenser mic, typically. But those are not things that you take on the road. They're really expensive, they're really fragile, and they do not have good off-axis rejection, if you guys remember what that is. So you're going to get lots of feedback with those when you're trying to turn them up. That was my problem with the first band last night. Oh, I was like sweating bullets the whole time. Because I sat way back, and I did that on purpose so I could make sure it was loud enough for people in the back, and I kept having to push the volume, push the volume, push the volume. And when we did that during sound check, I was right on the edge when we began. But it's so strange how you wouldn't think it would change at all. But I was able to push it a lot more than during sound check. And all that happened was the yard filled up with people. And in a totally open air thing like that, it shouldn't make any difference. But it did. That's the magic part of all this stuff. So typically you're going to be using a single microphone for doing this. So you have to position it well. It's going to depend on the player's technique, what kind of music he's doing. If you use a small diaphragm condenser and you mic it near the 12th fret, it's going to sound very bright and thin. So if you've got some large body dreadnought guitar that's just really boomy and you're trying to control that boominess, you can move the mic up in that direction, no matter what mic you're using. Typically, though, I like to mic in a live performance situation. I like to mic it kind of a little bit just below the sound hole. If you do it right at the sound hole, it can get really boomy. Another thing you can do is mic it down here. If it's very bright and very thin by its nature, you mic it down here, and that you get all this resonating tone instead of just a straight string. So that's something you can experiment with if you have the opportunity. 57s are okay for that. It's better if we have, if you can use a condenser for that. So I would initially try an 81 and see if that satisfies you, but it could make it sound too brittle. Because SM81s are just, their frequency response is ruler flat. So you'd think, oh, it's just going to do an authentic reproduction. That's not really what happens. What happens is it tends to emphasize the high end and all the screechiness and the finger movement and all that. And if that's what you want, great. usually not what you want. Okay, well, similar EQ and compression. Similar to what? What am I talking about? I think I'm talking about the last slide is what I'm talking about. Yeah. So the same as what you do, same approach as what you do with the direct injected signal. Okay. And then see how far you can push it before you get feedback. Because when the people get there, remember I told you about how you tell everybody to play and play like you're going to play and sing like you're going to sing. And I did it yesterday. And Dan sang into his mic and, he hollered and everything like that. And I got it so that he was deflecting up to 0. And then he started playing and he was, bam! Just his voice. It was redlining. Unfortunately, that mixer has lots of headroom. But it just always happens. So I really try and induce feedback into instruments that I think is I'm gonna have problems with. Pushing the level during the actual performance, I push it as high as I can to see if feedback will happen. And when it does, I watch the real-time analyzer that's built right into the mixer display. You will have access to that. And it'll show one peak going like that. You make note of where that is, and you make a notch, and you pull it right down, and you can get a whole lot more volume. But then you have to have them play again to make sure it still sounds good. So last night I had to do some radical EQ. That's the main problem with my porch is that the whole thing is this big resonator. Because it's this big hollow drum that they're all standing on. And then it's a big hollow structure that the sound is all reflecting of. So it's a real challenge with acoustic instruments. And instruments that produce a lot of bass. And they almost always go, whoa, dude, that's so much bass. And it's not. It's out front. It sounds fine. And they need to trust me. Because what's happening is it's coming back through the floor. Because the subwoofer's right in front of where the porch trellis stuff is. All right, so test for feedback and notch out what you can. And this thing, the reason I have this picture here is I don't think you've never used one, but this is a really effective weapon against feedback, these sound hole covers. Some guitar players don't like to use them, most of them have no problem. You've probably seen people put them in, and the reason they put them in is to control feedback. So if you're having a hard time getting enough gain before you get feedback when you're working with an acoustic player, ask them if they have a sound hole cover and if they wouldn't mind putting it in. Tell them you can get them louder that way. Always. With guitar players. All right. So, electric guitar is actually, I've got a lot of notes here, but it's actually really quite straightforward. It's much easier to deal with than acoustic. Once again, unless they're some super heavy metal band with like drop C tuning or something, the lowest string on a guitar is E, and heavy bands do drop D tuning. They drop it down a whole step. Sometimes they'll drop to C. I've got friends of mine are actually in a band called King's X that were pioneers of doing this. They kind of, believe it or not, they influenced that whole grunge movement that happened it was the 90s. The guys in Pearl Jam came to see them play and got the idea to do what they do. And then Pearl Jam became hugely famous, and my friends did not, but Pearl Jam was such a big fans of my friends that they had them open for them on a whole national tour in arenas and stuff. And they thought, this is it, we're going to make it. And they just never made it. So, but they are a really good example of drop D tuning for what that's worth. But typically, you do a high-pass filter at 100 hertz, again. What we do is everybody uses these emulator pedals. Are you using them? Yeah, okay. They've gotten really good. Some people don't even bring amps into the studio anymore. They just bring their emulator pedals. And you can just dial up, well, I want a 12-inch speaker, and I want this head, I want a tube amp, I want this gain stage. You know, you can get really, really fancy with them. And that saves us a lot of work as sound people because we just take a stereo out from that and go right into the board or into a DIs and into the board. No mics or anything. It typically requires minimal EQ. So what I typically do is I roll off below 100 hertz, and then I have everybody play. I just make sure that his gains are set right, so that it's bumping up against 0, right? And then I just say, okay, play a song, and then I see how their guitar tone choices fit in the song, and I might tweak a little bit to bring it out. Or make it sound more full-bodied if they're the only thing that's gluing a song together. But guitar players can be really sneaky, just like other musicians, and they can radically change their tone with a touch of a button. So, like last night, I was like, okay, play your guitar. Okay, now give me the loudest thing you're gonna do. And the one guitar player was like, oh man, you don't want that. I said, I'm like, yes, I do. And so that's really important. What I do when I'm sound checking a guitar player, electric guitar players, I say, give me your clean tone, give me your dirty tone, give me your lead tone. 3 tones they typically have. More, but those are the families, the tonal families that they typically use. And I say, could you please get your clean tone closer to your dirty tone so I don't have to, play with it so much or whatever. Sometimes we'll do that. And to get more body, you boost the low mids to get more clarity or definition. Like if somebody's doing arpeggio, right, like that, you might brighten it up a bit so that it stands out. Now they're doing a totally different role in the band. They're doing a kind of a melodic counterpoint to whatever's going on if they're playing like that. But then in an instant they go like that, so you got to stay on your toes. It's helpful to know the songs, of course. Sometimes you can't though. Like last night, I knew I had heard 2 or 3 of their songs. I said clean tone, distorted. I would also say lead. And I already talked about all of this. A little bit of compression, just as a safety release, in case somebody gets really wild on you. Okay, we don't do this yet, but that's a real guitar amp, by the way. That bizarre. But we might. And we're actually hoping to accommodate guitars to be able to use their amps. The way we're going to probably do it is, you guys probably all went down to the Hard Hat tour. There's that backstage wings. Probably throw a box back there, a soundproof box back there that they can put the amp in, and we put the mic it up inside the box and close the box so we have absolute control over the volume. That gives them more tonal choices if they want it. But it's still in our world we just need absolute control. Now last night I let them have as much stage volume as they wanted. Doesn't matter. If I was recording last night, it still wouldn't have mattered because I can adjust the gain structure on the recording part separate when I actually do it from the front of house. So typically the problem with having amps and stuff on the stage is there can be these, I call them the lane of death in front of a particular guitar amp, right? If you're sitting right in front of the speaker cone of a guitar amp, and that frequently happens, the guitar player might have the amp down here, and so his kneecaps are getting a great sound, but he wants to turn it up more so you can hear it up here. But then the audience's ears are right there. So all they're hearing is the guitar. Now some audience members will find that position because they love to just hear the guitar. And there's one dude that I was really concerned about at one of our concerts who just leaned his head into the subwoofers and just kept it there. It's like, what is wrong? But generally, that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to accomplish a really good overall mix so that the song itself has maximum emotional impact, right? So use SM57s. They're just the go-to for this in live music world. Now, Evie makes some nice mic designs. Actually, SE, the vocal mics that we are using now, they make an instrument mic now. Because when I was shopping for mine, I was like, why is this one cheaper? And it was the instrument version. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know what that's going to sound like. But the cool thing about their design, the problem with miking guitar amps is you got to get a stand and put it out in front, and it's poking out, people bump into it and stuff. There are mic designs that are designed to just drape over the front and hang there, which is a great design, but I don't know what they sound like because people still use mostly SM57. So mic positioning is really, really important. There are many configurations of guitar amplifiers. There are guitar amplifiers that have single speakers, dual speakers. There's even ones with 4 speakers, and there's even people who have multiple speaker bottoms, which is not necessary anymore, but visually it looks really cool. So when you're miking a guitar amp, if you guys can visualize what a speaker looks like, you've all probably seen a raw speaker, right? There's like a metal cone in the middle, and then there's paper on the outside that's in a kind of an inverted cone shape, right? And then there's a kind of a rubber gasket around the edge. If you take the SM57 and you point it 90 degrees to the cone, right in the middle, it'll be really bright. If you take that same SM57 and rotate it so that it's 90 degrees to the paper of the cone that's around the side, I used the same word for 2 different things. Sorry. That brings more mid-range, upper and lower mid-range, depending on where you position it. And it's not always consistent, even with the same model amp. There are people who like swear, no, this is my guitar amp. I like the way that tube over there rattles, and it gives me this particular tone. So there was a dude, this was in England, at a rock festival in 1972. 1974. And this guy comes on stage with his I think it was a Fender Twin, so it's got 2 speakers, and there's one of the speakers is missing, and I'm like, dude, we can fix you up with another amp if you want. And I see you. He's like, no, this tone is so great with that speaker missing. And it really was. He knew what he was talking about. So you just never know. But the point is, for you as a sound person, if you got a guy who's producing really great tone, ask him where he wants you to mic it. He might know. But if there's 2 speakers, you got to know there's 2 speakers because usually they're behind a grill, and you might just be miking the wood in between the speakers, which you might want to do at some point, but usually you don't, right? So it's important to know where the speakers are. My son had an 8x10 bass cabinet, 10-inch speakers, 8 of them. And the concept behind that was that they all work in concept to move the wood so that you've got this big thing that's going like this. But where you mic that, anyway. Let's see, did I miss anything? Yeah, and then the same steps as when you're direct injecting. Okay. Bass. Where's Neil tonight?
He has an ear infection at home, so he's drugged up.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I didn't catch it last
Oh,
It could be a super spreader event
It
for ear
seemed
infections.
fine yesterday, didn't it?
Yeah. All right, so it's really, really unusual that people mic their bass. I'm wondering if my friend Doug does that. He's the one in this band, King's X, and he's got this notorious bass tone that's on. Anybody here know what a clavinet is? Do you remember the song Superstition? It's that sound, that twangy sound. It's not a guitar, it's a keyboard. It's called a clavinet. His bass sounds like a clavinet. He actually plays a 12-string bass. He's got, ever since I was in a band with him a long time ago, and he was always after, he just was never happy with his bass tone, and finally he got it. And now his name is Doug Pinnick, and now there's a Doug Pinnick bass pack. Because everybody wants his bass tone now. It's really obnoxious. It is. It sounds like a clavinet, but it's cool. You know, it's unique. It's what they do, and a lot of people want to sound like them. So, but he would use the distortion in his speakers to get the tone that he wanted. So in that case, you'd have to mic him to get the tone out front. But typically, bass does bass, right? Now he's in a power trio, so a power trio is just bass, guitar, and drums. So the bass will fill in a lot of extra space that maybe a second guitar normally would. Typically, obviously, no high-pass filter, right? And throw some of them into the sub bus too. So last night, I had kick and bass in the subs. I don't think I put any keys in there. I don't remember doing it. And it just, it was astonishing. I could turn we had the front of house crossed over so that only the mids and the highs were going through the speakers that were on the sticks. And I had a subwoofer down here. When I turned the subwoofer down, all the bass went away, just completely. And I turned it up, and all of a sudden it's just rich. It was just it's a really responsive system. But typically only bass and only kick drum in there. Moderate to hard compression, it depends on the bass player. Now, we have one bass player that is really, really consistent. Becca, your friend, is really, Pete, yeah, he's really, really consistent. But it's more typical for bass players to be pretty dynamic, even unintentionally. It can have to do with the quality of their bass, where they happen to hit the string at a given time. It's a surprisingly difficult instrument to play, right? I mean, and to get good tone and to be consistent. I mean, because you're carrying the whole band on your shoulders, basically. So you want to make sure that bass, it's just as important in the kind of music that we're doing. It's just as important as the drums. As a matter of fact, you can make an argument that it's more important. Because typically, especially in a scenario where you're encouraging people to sing along, a worship scenario, the only clue, a lot of times in the kind of droney music that we sometimes end up doing, the only clue they've got is that the bass is moving around. So he moves from A to a D while everyone else is just sitting on the D or something like that. And so now the congregation knows that they need to move. But everyone else is just kind of doing this tinkly and drony stuff. And the bass is the only thing making changes. And many times it's the left hand of the keyboard player, too, which is kind of a bass thing sometimes. So it's really important that this is out there. I was very shy of this in the gym at first because the gym was such a bad place to have bass. And finally I got it to the point where I was happy in the room, and then I was online, it was still really weak. I just sort of overdid it. And so I, maybe the last six services maybe have had the bass right on my I mean, wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't good. And it made a big difference, in my opinion. But something that'll help with the dynamics of the bass, the dynamics being, of course, quietness to loudness, is to use pretty hard compression. It's going to do two things. It's going to even out the volume, but it's also, if you have a slow release, remember the attack and the release? The attack is how long you delay before you start compressing. And then the release is how long you delay before you let go, okay? Before you stop compressing. So if you have hard compression and a long release, what ends up happening is he can play that bass note and it just hangs beautifully in the air. Now sometimes you don't want that to happen, but most of the time you do, especially in the kind of music that we're dealing with. Now, some of the tunes are really upbeat and straight eights, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And those actually but that's more of a bass player technique, and it's a very difficult one. But they actually have to mute the notes in between. I was trying to have Neil do that last time. He was like, what? Kind of the deer in the headlights staring. So I'll practice overnight. But it's a very difficult thing to do. I just want to ask if you could do it. But so typically pretty hard compression, slow release, a little slow attack, so you get that transient in there, so people can hear the notes start. Because in a room like the gym, now Nathan tells me the auditorium was already sounding really fantastic, and they haven't done much to tune it at all. In a place like the gym, all that stuff down in that low frequency range kind of just blurs together. And if you do this outside of church, you're going to encounter venues like that. So what do you do to give the bass definition, this compression idea with the slow attack? And then there's also this trick that I found where you do a really narrow, like a notch, kind of a frequency, notch thing on a parameter equalizer at about 600 hertz, and turn it way up. And all of a sudden, you can tell what the bass is doing. Now, sometimes it's not 600 hertz, but it's always around there. So I just do that typically, and I back off from it if I have to, but it just really helps for some reason. I don't know. I've never seen it on anybody else's YouTube videos or anything, so that's our little secret, I guess. Or maybe I'm just lame. All right, and my hero, that's Rick Wakeman. He and I have the same birthday. That's the keyboard player for a band called Yes. Yeah, Yes. Oh my gosh. They were a mega band, arena fillers. Okay. Anyway, he's a really brilliant keyboard player, and a hilarious guy. Keyboards are usually pretty straightforward. It depends on the keyboard player, but all of our keyboard players are, well, really, Becca's the only one who ventures too far from piano, and not very often. But I want you guys, I mean, this is phase 2 of my life here, is getting hold of all the keyboard players and getting you to stretch a little bit. It'll be awesome. It'll be awesome. But right now it's pretty straightforward. No high pass filter, add to sub bass because they can do some sweet drone stuff down there sometimes. And sometimes I'll add a little soft EQ if there's a really like for most of a tune they're playing low, but then they play high, and the high notes are just really jumping out and the low notes aren't. Sometimes you can use compression carefully to take care of that. And sometimes it's just, if they're a really dynamic keyboard player, we don't have anybody like that that gets really, really quiet and really loud. We don't have anybody. Everybody's kind of just cruises along, and that's fine. So it's not problematic. If I ever get up there, it might be a problem. And sometimes I find myself EQing it a little bit to sit in the mix, and it'll be typical things. Notch out some 250, brighten up the high end. Almost always something like that. And if you got a full band up there and everybody's playing and singing, and it sounds thin, reach for the keys and turn them up. See what happens. Typically, they will help you out quite a bit. Sometimes what I have to ask the keyboard players to do is shift up an octave, because they tend to play right in the same range as the guitar player. And then they mask each other. Remember we talked about masking. So I'll just have, like Katie move, or Becca move just her right hand up on a whole song, and suddenly there's much more interesting things going on. Typically with pads, the purpose of pads is to fill out all that middle. So we're not going to be asking them to move right hands on. Piano, maybe. But keyboards are really quite straightforward. I just get a good level and move on. Okay, another science fiction reference. I have created a couple of zip files for you guys. And what I did this time, and I should have done this all along, is I didn't just give you the raw files, but I gave you a finished mix. And you can try and get there. Okay? Now, I was going to do something really nasty and give you a really bad acoustic. But I looked at how I processed it, and you don't have the tools. There's a thing called an exciter, which I had to throw on it, because some of the acoustic tracks I got when we were all isolating and everything were just pretty poor, and I had to actually create high frequency content. I couldn't use equalization to turn it up. It wasn't even there. All that would happen was I'd get hiss. So I had to create it. And there's actual processing devices that let you do that, called exciters. And so I threw that on it. I thought, no, that'll frustrate them too much. So these are zip files. I'm gonna go over them with you now, so you know what you're in for, and then we'll be done. So I played for you the acoustic things. Now the bad acoustic sound and the good acoustic sound, right? With the comparison with the passive and the active in this case is what's making it sound bad. Those files, those links are available in the notes. I will try to remember to get the notes out right away, Becca. Sorry, everybody, sorry. So I want you to download those and listen to them on headphones or whatever, and just get it in your brain what good sounds like and what bad sounds like, okay? And then these files that are up here I'm about to go through. Or actually, the top one is the acoustic. I'm going to play you the second one again. So this is the raw one that Nathan gave me. Sounds pretty good. But apparently I wasn't happy with that, so I made it sound like this. Much brighter. By itself, you might think, maybe I like it, maybe I don't. It's pretty cool. It happened to work really well in the mix. So a lot of times that's what happens. You EQ something that to sound well on its own, and then you throw it in the mix and it gets lost. And so you go back. And it's kind of an iterative process. That's why you have the whole band play through a couple songs. They do it anyway to rehearse. And the one thing you don't want to be tweaking while they're rehearsing is their input gain, because it screws up their headphone mix. Right? Sometimes you have to. And when I do that, I go up and I impress whoever it is, and I tell them, I say, you're probably going to need to do something because I changed it. And last night they were got frustrated with me because they did that to them. They weren't letting me get the initial gain in the first place. They were like, okay, I want a little more guitar, and I hadn't set the gain.
Yeah, it was tricky. They right away went
Yeah,
on monitors.
So, but we worked it out. So that is your reference for what I ended up with for the song. This one had, it was pretty straightforward. It had Nathan and I think Becky was singing and Jim and Cajon. That's about it. So I think the reason this is bright like this is because the Cajon was occupying all this a lot of this middle space. So I had to brighten this up so you can hear the detail of the guitar. Okay, and so now we've got this is an unprocessed electric guitar. So this is from the closing song that we did this week. There were like 7 guitar tracks or something.
Yeah.
It was really fun to mix. So that's there, and this is what I did to make it sit in the mix. Can anybody describe to me, in your own words, the differences between these two? I'll play them again. What words would you use to? Can you hear the difference, first of all? Can everybody hear a difference? It's okay to say if you can't, because this is all a lot of ear training. But everybody can hear it?
Subtle.
Okay. It is a bit subtle. I can hear it plain as day, but it's a bit subtle. What do you think the differences were? Anybody want to venture a guess? Want to hear it again? Okay. Unprocessed. And processed.
I think it's got this like more boomy, meaty, echoey sound to it when it's processed, or like when it's edited.
Meaty, that's a really good word for this. Yes. I would not use echoey. Although, did I add echo? No, I don't think
It's probably in what you got.
I think it was in the original.
So,
Yeah, that's some good verbiage. I did what I can hear. I don't remember what I did, but what I can hear is that there's a little bit of low mids that I pushed. So once again, probably around 250. That's where all the meat and the boominess lies. In this case, we wanted to add some. But what about that high end? Listen just to the high end once. Did everybody hear the difference or not? Maybe not.
I feel like almost sound. This is probably wrong, but it almost sounds to me like the unprocessed is like peaking.
What is peaking?
The unprocessed one, and then
Oh.
it doesn't quite sound so like piercing.
Yeah,
When it's
that's right. That's exactly right. It sounds like I rolled off some high end. I probably didn't do much more than that. Well, I probably
Sounds like there's a compressor.
yeah. I probably compressed it too. So you can get some of that meatiness stuff going on. You can throw a compressor on it. I have a special compressor, which is a section that does this thing called tape saturation, which is back in the day when they used magnetic tape, they used to hit it really hard, turn it up really hard, like beyond what the tape was supposed to be able to handle. And it distorted in this really nice way. And I probably did a little bit of that, which you're not going to be able to do unless I don't know if Reaper has a tape emulation plug-in in it or not. But, I mean, you might have something, and you might have something, but in your DAWs, and you might. But I don't know if Reaper comes with that. It's not typically something you get along with the DAW. You do get it with mine for free.
Of course.
For free. Have to buy the dog.
You do have to buy the DAW, that's right. So anyway, you have to go off and make those files, the raw files, and they're labeled what's called acoustic DI. That's for comparison, the good and the bad, right? One's called acoustic, and one's called acoustic processed. So they're plainly labeled. And then there's electric guitar and electric guitar processed. So you try and make the one that's not processed sound like the one that is. See if you can do it. And then, what will we be talking about next week? Let me look at my syllabus. We're getting pretty far along here. Putting it all together. Ooh, this is where it's going to get fun. So next week, I will probably give you like a 16, 18 track mix, all the raw tracks, and give you the finished product and ask you to mix it. But we will go through my process. And it's going to be, I'll try and slant it towards live, but we're not live. So it'll be applicable, but that's what we'll do next week.
Next week is the 5th.
Oh, the
You
5th
want
of
people to
July.
have off.
What do you guys want to do?
I won't be here if it happens.
You want to be here?
I won't be.
You won't be.
If it happens.
Okay. What does everybody else think? I think we might be due for a break.
I'm also
This
on
is
call.
the next subject is
You might be dead.
a big leap, and it might serve you well if you use the time in this way to just kind of go back over everything before the next time we get together. And I sure don't mind. Oh, I won't be here either. That kind of answers that.
Problem solved.
We're kind of plotting something right now. That's right. I might not be here. So, how many were at the thing last night at my house? Okay, you were there too. You came, Kate?
I was right behind you.
What?
I was sitting right behind you.
Yeah, we were sitting together.
I can't believe you didn't hear the babies.
I was a little bit focused.
They were singing along.
There was somebody right next to me, like in my ear, who knew all of Dan's songs and was singing along out of tune.
Oh yeah, she had the shirt on and everything.
Yeah,
sure did.
Don't be
Yeah.
a douchebag. You're probably
Yeah.
a douchebag. Like I mean, she was gung ho the
Yeah.
whole night.
I almost asked her to move. He calmed down after a while because he started singing new songs that she didn't know. So, that was
That's
fun.
rough.
That's hilarious.
So in 2 weeks then,
2 weeks. Yeah.
we will probably not be here.
Awesome.
I believe in 2 weeks we'll probably be in the building
Sweet.
as far as where we're functioning out of at that point.
All right.
So
We'll
I don't-
probably. Well, we'll see what happens, but I think we'll probably do something like this again.
Yeah.
Because I think after that, shortly after that, I mean, I've got troubleshooting. This is a big, big topic, and you need to know it. Don't know what else is after that until we're going to start actual sessions on the Avantis after that. Trying to see if there's a way that I can project the screens on the
We
Avantis.
could set this PA up in the theater room, multi-purpose room over there, and do our next course in there, Matt.
No.
I'm about to walk out.
Of course it's over.
Figure it out yourself.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank
With
you.
that,